Chapter 6. A Flicker of Redemption. As the evening continued, the house carried the heartening aromas of roasted potatoes, buttered bread, and a pot of stew simmering over low heat on the stove. Thyme and bay leaf permeated the air, and Clara added sliced carrots and onions from the root cellar to the pot. She ladled the stew into chipped bowls with practiced efficiency. "Eat while it's hot," she urged, setting the last bowl in front of Nathan before easing into her chair. Her apron, dusted with flour and smudged with gravy, bore witness to the flurry of activity that had consumed her all afternoon. Nathan nodded as he dipped his spoon into the stew, though Clara detected worry in his eyes. He didn't speak it, but it was there, beneath the surface. Would Mrs. Kelly be all right? Before either of them voiced their concerns, Clara clasped her hands in habit. "Let's say a prayer first." He straightened, stilling in the motion of lifting his spoon. Without a word, he bowed his head. Following suit, Clara closed her eyes and found the rhythm of the old prayer, words that had carried them through every season. "Lord, keep each of us safe this night. Grant healing to the sick, bread to the hungry. Guide those who lead our village," Nathan prayed. "Give us strength to protect what you have blessed us with, and guide us with your wisdom. Amen." "Amen," the group repeated. Clara's eyes fluttered open, and she gestured toward the stew. "Eat," she encouraged again. "Everyone, please eat." The group dined in silence, the clatter of spoons against ceramic the only sound. Her gaze flicked between them. Nathan, Margaret, Thomas, and Peter, faces lined with fatigue, shoulders drooping. She ensured there was enough stew for everyone, with some left over for Mrs. Kelly. Rationing had been tight lately. The empty bowls and murmured thanks were worth the extra effort. The rich aroma of the stew that usually brought comfort now twisted her stomach. She pressed her hand briefly against her apron, wondering if anyone noticed how she'd barely touched her portion, how she sipped water between each careful spoonful. But they were all too preoccupied with their own thoughts, and she was grateful for the distraction of serving others. Later, standing in the kitchen, she set a newly brewed cup of tea on the table, the steam curling in delicate threads. Mrs. Kelly rested in the parlor, Margaret's unwavering presence a comfort as she sponged the woman's forehead with cool water. The flickering firelight highlighted the faded pattern of the rug, with each sputter of the logs. After eating, Thomas muttered about fetching more blankets from home. Before the cold seeped deeper into his skin, he hadn't returned yet. Clara stared at the place of the table where Nathan had been seated, eating his stew before heading back to the workshop. "The cradle," he'd said. "I need to work on it." It made little sense. Why would he venture out again instead of waiting until morning? However, she knew better than to argue when he was determined. A low moan carried from the parlor, and Clara hurried in, her skirt swishing against the wooden floor. Mrs. Kelly stirred, her fever-bright eyes opening to the dim lamplight. "Peter," she breathed, her voice hoarse. There was recognition there, a mother's desperate awareness, unwilling to let go. "He's here," Margaret said, brushing a strand of damp hair from the woman's brow. Peter's tiny hands clasped his mother's, as if sheer will tethered her to him. In the boy's blue eyes, Clara saw shadows too burdensome for his young years. "I'm here, Ma," he said. "You're going to be all right." Clara's chest ached at the tenderness in his tone, at the way Margaret's hand lingered on Peter's shoulder, offering consolation. As Clara reached for her tea, the fire crackled sharply, sending a brief shower of sparks up the chimney. Night pressed darkly on the window, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something beyond the icy conditions waited out there. As if reading her thoughts, Thomas entered the kitchen with a rush of cold air, his scarf wound tightly around him. "I checked, and the doctor is still busy." He pointed at Mrs. Kelly before handing Clara a stack of blankets. "You've got the beef stock, don't you?" "I have stew left." "Just broth for now." Clara nodded and spun to the kitchen. "I'll be back shortly," he continued. "I'm off to help Josephine put the little ones to bed." He'd always been the type of father who was involved in his children's daily routines. Nathan entered a few minutes later. The lamplight sketched his features, his high cheekbones and dark eyes, a handsomeness that still made her breath catch. He seemed different, less hard, more intent. He glanced at the parlor, where Peter murmured reassurances to his mother while Margaret sat beside them. "Clara," Nathan said, "I'm going back out." "Why did you come in?" "I wanted to check on everyone." His eyes lingered on the parlor doorway, and Clara caught an unfamiliar hesitation in his stance, so different from the rigid isolation he'd maintained these many months. "There's not much more that can be done. Mrs. Kelly is resting and warm, and Peter is safe." Clara turned, a wooden spoon in her hand, the broth simmering behind her. Steam rose between them, carrying the rich scent of beef and herbs. She wanted to reach for him, to ask what drove him back to his workshop with such urgency, but the words stuck in her throat. He shifted his weight, opened his mouth as if to explain, then closed it. When he turned to leave, it wasn't with his usual abrupt retreat, but with the air of a man carrying a purpose too fragile to name. The darkness swallowed him, and the workshop lamp blazed to life almost immediately, casting long shadows in the snow. What could he be working on with such urgency? The Henderson cradle wasn't due for weeks. Margaret came into the kitchen, having settled Mrs. Kelly into a fitful sleep. "Nathan is different tonight," she observed. "Something's changed." "I thought the same." Clara hesitated. It was like watching Nathan wake from a long winter, as if a boy's simple wonder did what all our careful words couldn't. "More than wonder," Margaret replied. "Necessity, perhaps. Need has a way of stripping away pretense." She paused, considering. "When we were children, Nathan taught me how to find faces in wood grain. Before he learned about competitions and commissions, before he started caring what the high society Bradfords thought. He told me once that every piece was a prayer made visible," Clara said. "Yes." Margaret spooned a cup of broth. "Prayers change, don't they? Sometimes they stop being about glory and start being about grace." She turned toward the parlor, then hesitated. "I saw how you barely touched your stew tonight, Clara." Clara's hand flew to her waist, but Margaret was already gone, leaving her with the echo of understanding in her sister-in-law's words. An hour later, Nathan hoisted a sizable piece wrapped in drop cloth from his workshop, struggling with it as he crossed the garden. The shape was clearly furniture, too bulky to be the Henderson cradle, and smaller than his usual commissions. When he entered the house, his eyes held a brightness Clara hadn't seen in years. She recognized that particular light. It was the same that had illuminated his face when he'd carved their wedding chest, when he'd fashioned the chapel doors. Back in their early days, when each creation that left his workshop had been a testament to both faith and love. This light was different, deeper, as if sadness had taught it to burn more purely. Her hand strayed to the letter in her pocket, and she wondered if now, finally, he was ready to read it. "Peter," Nathan called, placing the piece in the kitchen. "Please come here a minute." The boy rushed in, exhaustion dragging at his small shoulders. Lamplight showed the shadows under his blue eyes, as blue as winter mornings. His fair curls framed his face, cheeks round with childhood. When he looked at Nathan, his face transformed. Something in that trust, a child's unfettered belief in adults' power to make things right, struck Clara with an almost physical ache. His fingers twisted the hem of his too-short shirt, and she noticed how he tried to stand tall despite his obvious fatigue. Here was childhood colliding with burden, innocence meeting necessity. The sight stirred memories of all her past hopes for a little one, though, with her secret growing, those longings carried a different weight. Her husband knelt beside and unwrapped the drop cloth to reveal a rocking chair, its proportions ideal for someone of Mrs. Kelly's slight frame. This was no ordinary chair. Its arms featured unpretentious, well-designed carvings of woodland creatures. A fox peered from underneath carved leaves, while rabbits frolicked by the spindles. The wood gleamed golden, the cherry grain emphasized by Nathan's meticulous finishes. For your mother, so she can rest properly while she recovers. Nathan's voice gentled as he guided Peter's fingers over the wood. And these? They're yours to find whenever you need reminding that you're not alone. Every creature tells a story if you know where to search. Peter outlined the fox's clever face. They're almost alive, sir. They are, in their own way. See how he's watching over the rabbits? Strength comes in protecting others. Here was the Nathan she loved, the man who detected legends in wood grain, who believed rare beauty healed wounded hearts. His tenderness toward Peter reaffirmed all their lost dreams of parenthood, mellowed by these unexpected blessings. Nathan. Thomas stepped inside the house and paused. You made this? Just now? Nathan nodded, his hand resting on the chair's back. I did. This is remarkable. Thomas moved closer, bending to study the carvings. His voice held an emotion Clara hadn't heard in a long time, respect and admiration. How you've matched the grain patterns to the creature's movements. He straightened, and for a moment the brothers stood in a silence heavy with shared memory. Thomas cleared his throat. I'd forgotten how you could do that. See things in the grain that no one else could see. The wood tells you where it wants to go. Nathan glanced at his brother. We discuss this often, remember? Margaret marched into the kitchen. Mrs. Kelly drank her broth and is asking for Peter. She stopped mid-stride, her practiced composure falling away as her gaze fell on the rocking chair. Oh, Nathan! Her voice held none of its usual polish. For a moment, the sophisticated city woman and the country child merged in her face as she studied the chair. You found it again, haven't you? What Father always said about letting the wood speak. Together, they moved the chair into the parlor, where Mrs. Kelly sat propped up on a sofa with Clara's best pillows. She went still at the sight of the chair, a trembling hand reaching out to touch the wooden arm, as if confirming it was real. Mr. Whitmore. Nathan ducked his head, calloused fingers running along the edge of his work apron. Just a chair for your recovery. The factory furniture is too hard for someone regaining their strength. The last words came out gruff, but Clara caught the undertone, how healing could flow both ways, from maker to recipient and back again. Mrs. Kelly's fingers wandered along the wood grain, studying each creature as though she'd stumbled upon an unexpected gift in her darkest hour. Her pain-lined face bloomed with amazement at every new discovery. A squirrel darting through branches, a deer emerging from morning mist. Peter wriggled, his earlier weariness vanishing as he leaned in close to lead her exploration. Here, Ma, See how the fox keeps watch while the rabbits play? His voice rang with pride as he shared each secret of the chair, and Clara noted how Mrs. Kelly's rigid posture melted. The boy paused between discoveries to search his mother's expression, measuring her healing in the curve of her lips. By firelight, the simple rocker held extraordinary gifts, a piece of furniture becoming salvation, a mother finding rest, a son playing guide to joy, a craftsman's gift of comfort carved from understanding. Margaret looped an arm around Clara and steered her to the kitchen. "You're pale, dear. Sit down before you fall." Clara sank into a chair, the familiar wave of nausea growing stronger. Margaret studied her face with perceptive eyes, and a flicker of recognition passed between them, the silent understanding that flows between women who've shared intimate rhythms. The corners of Margaret's mouth lifted in the barest suggestion of acknowledgement, as if she'd pieced together a puzzle she'd been watching take shape over their meals and quiet conversations. When Clara offered a slight acknowledgement, tears pricked. Her answering smile to her sister-in-law radiated, tinged with the relief of sharing this silent acknowledgement of her happiness. "Thomas," Nathan said, entering the kitchen with his brother, "the factory Edward is planning. What will it mean for the Mill families? For people like the Kellys?" Thomas shifted, his practical nature seeming to wrestle with harder truths. "The factory means jobs, steady ones," he replied. "But looking at this," he gestured to Peter, showing his mother another hidden creature in the foliage, to the way Mrs. Kelly's pain-lined face had relaxed. "Nothing made by machines can do this. Nothing stamped out in identical pieces can ever speak to the soul. Perhaps I've been too quick to embrace progress at any cost." "Maybe there's room for both," Clara said. "Progress doesn't have to mean losing every exquisite piece." Nathan's eyes found hers, and a revelation unfolded. This was why he'd been summoned to create for occasions like this, when visible mercy healed wounded hearts. A wall clock in the hall marked 10 o'clock, its brass voice rolling through the rooms. There were hard battles ahead, the state's modernization program, the changing times that threatened to sweep away everything they held dear. As Nathan returned to the parlor and guided Peter's hand over the wood grain, Clara saw 3 generations of craftsmen in that gesture. Nathan's father teaching him, Nathan teaching Peter, and perhaps someday their own child learning these same mysteries. This was more than showing a boy some carved animals. It was Nathan rediscovering his role as a keeper of traditions worth preserving. Some blessings, once given, could never be taken away. Awe, once created, lived forever in transformed hearts. And the greatest miracles arrived in the humblest forms of tender strength. Here in their home stood proof of what machinery could never replicate, a chair born from necessity and night-long devotion. As Peter curled near his mother in the chair's embrace, Clara understood some battles weren't fought with fists or funds, but with a stubborn devotion to work that mattered, with the courage to forge beauty even as the world turned toward cold efficiency. Outside, frost etched complex designs across the window panes, while her snow angel gathered the night's fresh powder, and wind-blown crystals settled into its outstretched wings. Each snowflake found its place in the larger design, resembling the miracles unfolding in her home. A mother's healing, an artisan's redemption, a child's wonder. Heaven's mercies, if only people were brave enough to receive them.